back to Think So I'll Take It From Here, the podcast where we deep dive into TV, film, and books, and break down the stories that made us feel something. Whether it's rage, sadness, shock, or all three at once, we're talking about it. We're launching a brand new astrology series where we explore the birth charts of iconic characters, starting with the Twilight universe. This will be a reoccurring series, and we're kicking it off with Edward Cullen. We'll be looking at both his canon birth chart and one from the day he was turned into a vampire. Did the stars make him this intense, or should we just blame Stephanie Meyer? I'm joined by Kat, our resident astrologer, and I'll let her introduce herself before we dive in.
Thanks, Kimmy. It's really great to join you, and I'm so excited to share some magic on Twilight from an astrological point of view. I'm an astrologer and educator in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm a creative entrepreneur, so I wear a lot of hats, but naturally, astrology is one of my biggest passions. I definitely grew up on Twilight and had my obsession to an extent, but I will say it's a lot more fun to make fun of and reminisce at the same time as we grow up and watch it age over time. Pun intended.
That was so corny, but it's okay. It's okay.
I love it. I just had to. I couldn't help it. But Kimmy, once you shared the birth and rebirth information of Bella and Edward's charts before and after their transition into eternal life, I couldn't wait to pull all four of them, and they each spoke volumes about their backgrounds and how their stories unfold. I'm excited to check out some other characters too, just to see how they play in, but our eternal lovers gave us plenty to sink our teeth in for starters.
Not another pun. Not another pun.
I had to. Okay. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you, Kimmy, and your listeners to share what's behind the birth charts and hopefully teach a little bit more about astrology as we go.
So this episode, as I said, we are focusing on Edward Cullen, the sparkly vampire who had every teenage girl convinced that nightly stalking was peak romance. Good thing we can all admit now that it was creepy as hell. Thanks, Stephanie Meyer, for giving us these chaotic characters, but I'll take it from here. Now, before we dive into the birth charts, I want to walk you through the historical research I did to figure out when Edward was actually turned into a vampire. In Twilight, we learned that Edward was born on June 20th, 1901 in Chicago. He was turned into a vampire in 1918 during the height of the Spanish flu pandemic. He was 17 years old and dying from the flu when Dr. Cullen stepped in to save him. Now, canon doesn't give us an exact date for when he was turned, but there's a moment in Twilight where Edward explains that his father died early in the outbreak and he and his mother Elizabeth were both hospitalized shortly after. On her deathbed, Elizabeth pleaded to Carlisle to save her son. It's implied she didn't know his secret per se, but she somehow knew he was capable of more than the other doctors. She told him to do everything in his power to help Edward, and Carlisle took the request seriously. After she died, and with Edward moments from death himself, Carlisle made the decision to turn him. And I wanted to go deeper and try to pinpoint a more specific, historically accurate date. So I looked into data from the Chicago History Museum, the Influenza Encyclopedia, and Old Chicago Tribune articles, and here is what I found. The Spanish flu hit Chicago in two major waves, but the second wave was the deadliest. It surged from late September into October 1918, and by mid-September, the city was reporting tens of thousands of infections between September 26th and September 30th. There was a huge spike in deaths at that time. Public spaces started shutting down in early October, and hospitals were overcrowded. Given all of that, it makes sense that Edward was turned right in the middle of that chaos. Based on that timeline, I estimate his vampire rebirth date to be September 26, 1918. It's not canon confirmed, but it aligns closely with both the story and the real historical events. Now that we've set the scene, let's talk about Edward himself. Edward grew up in a well-off Chicago family. He was smart, cultured, and raised with strong values. Then he got turned into a vampire and frozen at 17. For a while, he leaned into the vampire thing and he actually hunted humans, but only the ones he thought deserved it. Eventually, the guilt got loud and he slinked back to Carlisle, non-human, allowed kind of lifestyle. If Edward ever wants to spin the block, I've got a list of people he can start with. Some fascists, specifically, if you catch my drift, but I digress. While prepping for this episode, I couldn't stop thinking about a potential spinoff. And since this podcast is all about rewrites, here's mine. Give us the Edward Cullen anti-hero series. You know, when he's freshly turned, morally unhinged, and serving justice with fangs. A full arc where he's stalking the worst of humanity, telling himself he's saving lives while absolutely spiraling. Think Twilight meets Dexter. There's so much to unpack there because something dark had to happen to him for him to go back to killing deer again. Was there some kind of tragic accident that pushed him to want to go back to Carlisle? I just think there's something that can be explored there. And with Robert Pattinson playing Batman, I think he'd totally be down to play this morally gray kind of era for Edward. But after his mom passed away and Carlisle saved him, he's had this fear of losing control. He spent over a century haunted by what he is, trying to live with purpose while constantly afraid of hurting the people around him. That fear intensifies when he meets Bella, the one person he wants to protect more than anything, and also the one whose blood tempts him the most. Bella becomes his greatest love and his greatest conflict. He literally calls her his personal brand of heroine. Poetic? Maybe. Alarming? Definitely. Edward is protective and romantic, but he's also obsessive, controlling, and full of self-loathing. So for our chart reading, we'll be using two dates: his human birth date, June 20th, 1901, and his estimated vampire rebirth, September 26th, 1918. So Kat, can you walk us through his charts?
Yes, absolutely, I can. And before I start, I just have to say I'm absolutely dead about Edward's rewrite, and I can completely see it and am totally here for it. So there's a lot to say about each individual chart, but the correlations between two birth and rebirth charts for each character was really outstanding to me. I know we're just focusing on Edward for today, but I have already done some deep diving into the correlation between his relationship with Bella, so that's definitely going to be interwoven throughout our episodes. We don't know the exact time of the birth or rebirth for Edward, so we're not able to pull the chart with the house systems, but we can definitely find a lot just from the planet placements alone. Time of birth is so important because it changes every 2 hours, so the closest to exact as possible is the most accurate. Usually if we have to guess or we don't know the time of birth, I think it's best not to include it. The planet placements represent the position of each planet in the sky the minute you were born, which is basically like taking a screenshot of the sky that captures the energy of the planets that you receive through the lens and essence of each zodiac sign, depending on where it is at that time. So we have plenty to work with just the planetary placements alone here. Originally, Edward is a Gemini sun with a stellium, meaning he has multiple planets, the Sun, Neptune, and Pluto, in the same sign, Gemini. This tells me he was full of potential, naturally intellectual, studious, ambitious, and has a curious mind.
I can see that because think about the scene where we see Bella experience his room for the first time and it's filled with so much music and so much books and he plays the piano. I think that comes across. Like you see that in his character.
There's that clip of his past life. He's walking down the street or something before he got sick and it looks like he's on his way to go to university or like, you know, he kind of looks like a student or something. I mean, from my perspective.
Is there anywhere in there that tells us why he didn't have a bed? Like, I know he didn't want to sleep. We know that, but like, is that cosmic?
I mean, what first comes to mind is because he's a vampire, so he doesn't ever sleep. So I guess they're not planning on having guests over to the house to have to like justify or defend themselves from having a bed in their bedroom or not. But I mean, that's definitely something interesting we can look into and circle back with for sure.
Subscribe so you do not miss us answer the question of why Edward did not have a bed.
Literally. So that kind of sets a tone for how his character might have been originally as a person before he turned into a vampire. A couple things that stood out to me were his North Node and Lilith in Scorpio with his Gemini stellium, including Pluto, because this indicated to me that he was destined to die young and, as we know, become a vampire. It was actually very specific because Gemini represents youth and early development, and Pluto is the planet of death and rebirth cycles, which is also the ruler of Scorpio, where his north node of destiny and Lilith reside.
So Edward was always supposed to be a vampire.
Yeah, with the knowledge that we have looking at these charts and knowing what we do from reading the books and watching the movies about the character that is set, and then looking at his original birth chart from the life that he had before, I can see those correlations from what we know of his character and what is reflected from the Gemini of his personality and how he might spend his time. So reading might be something that he just carries with him to educate himself and have the conversations that he wants to, or just to keep that mind very quick, because he is a mind reader, and that definitely goes into the mercurial vibes of his personality and the way that he does think and express himself. He gets to choose how much he speaks, or like he definitely sets a tone when he enters a room without having to speak, which honestly could be part of that darker Pluto energy where it's like I might have a lot to say but I'm not gonna say it, and this might be how it translates more when he turns into a vampire, but we don't have a lot of background on how social he was before the pandemic came and swept him and everyone out and everything. But just from putting it all together with the north node of destiny and the Lilith in Scorpio, Scorpio really helps set the tone for where we're going. Lilith, I would say, is normally the deepest, darkest parts of ourselves that we don't want to admit or to other people. I've also learned that Lilith in men can represent their unhealed feminine wounds and the unhealed feminine energy they attract in a partner until they're able to heal that within themselves. And saying that out loud right now makes me feel like he's basically just cosmically cursed. From the never-ending reminder that his mother arranged for him to be killed or worse on his deathbed, to living out this twisted teen drama fantasy. This was his destiny, and that pretty much checks a lot of boxes for what his original birth chart says about this transformation that he undergoes in his early lifetime. Another really big part of his chart that stood out to me was his Cancer placements. This does end up playing a part in both birth and rebirth charts, so I'll make more of those connections soon. But I will say, to start, his Mercury and Venus are both in Cancer, which means that he was naturally very oriented around family values, and this was where his protective, loyal, and caring traits developed, along with very strong emotions and intuition. I've had my history with Leo moons, which Edward is also, and I will say that they are very about themselves, so not to throw shade at any of them, but this might have something to do with why Edward just can't get over himself in his past life and why he has to be so dramatic all the time. So now to switch over to his rebirth chart, the most fascinating thing for me was that he is a Libra sun and Gemini moon. The Gemini moon stands out to me because he was a Gemini sun with the stellium in his past life, which to me says that he is still the same person on the inside, just internalized.
What's the stellium again? What does that mean?
The stellium meaning he has multiple planets in the same sign. So for Edward, his sun, Neptune, and Pluto were all in the same sign of Gemini.
And what does that mean, I guess, for him as a character?
That really references his nature around being studious, intellectual, being into reading and education. The Neptune really brings in kind of like this idealist fantasy in the traits that would reflect in this Gemini, which is like the social, mindful, educational, intellectual oriented type. So that's really that energy that kind of makes that more prominent and well known when you have multiple planets in the same sign, when you have that stellium. So with his sun sign, our sun sign is our external persona and how we identify in this life, where our moon sign represents our internal realm, our emotions, and our intuitive nature. Edward has his original sun sign as his rebirth moon sign, which basically encapsulates his previous life and what it was into what he will always carry inside, in terms of what could come across as broody, from always being stuck living the life of your past without actually getting to live it out and be able to die after. Another super cool insight we discovered was that his Mercury and Venus both shifted from Cancer to Virgo, which, spoiler alert,
if you're getting Twilight spoiled almost 17 years later, I would honestly be impressed. But sorry, I'll let you finish and get to your point, Kat.
Bella is actually a Virgo in both her lifetimes in Twilight, with a Virgo stellium there of her own, which we'll explore in our next episode. But this automatically indicates that Edward's values shift from family to Bella and all the characteristics that she embodies. Mercury and Venus are both personal planets, so their energies hit closer to home. Mercury represents how we express ourselves, communicate, and share thoughts and ideas, while Venus is all about love, values, preferences, and possessions. The fact that both of these planets are in the same sign together and then move to another sign together really makes the personal shift clear in Edward, between his personal time and ideas to his love and devotion. I really enjoy seeing that he does have this background still that focuses on the importance of family, because this carries over and shows in his next life with the Cullens, because his new Cancer placements are Jupiter and Pluto, where his family values and protective nature become the source of his expansion, and the good fortune from Jupiter, with the literal afterlife represented by Pluto. His Mars in Scorpio will be a good way to segue into the transition and transformation in this story regarding Edward and Bella's relationship and their arc of becoming vampires, everlasting lovers, and pure entertainment for us. Scorpio Mars placement always stands out to me because Mars is the ruling planet of Scorpio. Scorpio gets its intensity and passion, determination, and drive from Mars, and Edward is not holding this placement back from us. I'll share more about this when we get to the correlations between the two charts.
So, Edward's chart is basically a cosmic map of longing, control, guilt, and love. It makes perfect sense why this guy was written to be both a dream and a red flag. And honestly, once you look at Twilight with a bit of perspective, it all starts to click. Edward's entire arc plays out like a morality tale wrapped in a love story. It reads like Mormon-inspired fantasy, where purity and restraint are the ultimate virtues. The goal is to resist temptation until marriage, and then be rewarded with immortality, family, and peace. His struggle isn't about being a vampire. It's about trying to be good in a world that tells you your desires just make you dangerous. He swings between obsession and self-sacrifice and somehow calls that love. So get ready for Bella's chart next episode, because Edward might be the brooding vampire trying to atone, but Bella, she's the emotional support human he's projecting all of his guilt onto. I want to thank you so much, Kat, for joining me on this episode. It's been such a blast revisiting the world of Twilight with you, and I cannot wait for our next episode on Bella. Can you let everyone know a little bit more about yourself and where they can find you?
Yes, thank you so much again, Kenny, for having me. A little bit about me. I discovered astrology on tumblr.com when I was in high school and really identified with my sun sign immediately. I'm a Scorpio sun, Virgo moon, and Scorpio rising, so that's already revealing a lot about me. But it wasn't until I overcame a personal tragedy in my early 20s that turned me toward astrology to my mental health and redefined my connection to source and spirituality, which ultimately led to transforming my life into the current life of my dreams that I'm living now. I've taught myself how to observe and utilize astrology from an esoteric perspective, which basically translates into astrology that speaks to your soul, the journey it's been on, why it's here, and where it's going. I also learned recently from experiencing my Saturn return that my purpose is to be here as an astrologer and educate others how to integrate astrology into their lives. So now I empower self-paced learners with the tools to build their own astrology practice and live in sync with the signs. I offer readings and classes with a really fun community I've built virtually on Patreon. In person, I host different local and international events like workshops, classes, and retreats. I'm currently available to book for retreats and collaborate with other healing and wellness facilitators. You can find me at Moon Valley Astrology on Instagram, TikTok, and Patreon. I'm currently teaching bi-weekly new moon and full moon classes. So our next class is this upcoming Tuesday, August 5th at 4 p.m. Pacific, and then bi-weekly from there. I'm also offering a discount on readings for Patreon members. So anyone who joins the free membership can receive 20% off a birth chart reading with me.
Thanks again, Kat, so much. This has been another another episode of Thinks I'll Take It From Here. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Take It From Here Pod. If you want full access to Edward's birth chart, it will be available on Kat's Patreon from the moment this episode drops. So make sure to go there and get the chart so you can actually see what the stars have to say about Edward Cullen. Listeners are also getting 20% off all birth chart readings, and if we're gonna overanalyze immortal soulmates, we might as well learn something about ourselves too, right? I'll be linking all of Kat's info in the show notes. Also, if you're heading to Baltimore Comic-Con, I'll be there covering the event, so grab your tickets at baltimorecomiccon.com and shoot me a DM if you're gonna be there. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll see you guys next when we deep dive on Bella. Bye, everyone.
Bye.